All right, everyone, welcome back to another episode of Masari's Unqualified Opinions. I'm Ryan Selkis at 2-Bit Idiots. Got another special guest today, Jonathan Johnson, who's the CEO of Overstock. He's the president of Medici Ventures, and he's also the chairman at T0. Overstock, as you know, over the years, has been one of the pioneers, especially out of public companies and e-commerce companies in the blockchain space. And we're going to cover a lot of ground during this conversation today. But first and foremost, Jonathan, I know it's a little bit of a cliched question. I know it's a bit boring, but I always think that it's invaluable just to get the proper context for our audience as to how the various guests came down the rabbit hole and got to be where they are on the crypto side. So can you just talk about a little bit about your involvement in the industry and how we got to this point, how you first got exposed to Bitcoin or crypto in general, and what that early journey was that led you here, because you've been with Overstock for quite a while.
Yeah, Ryan, that's a great question. It's a story I'd love to tell. In the fall of 2013, I was the president of Overstock, and one evening I was home and my then high school age son, Porter, asked me a question that I had no idea what it meant. He said, "Dad, when's Overstock going to start accepting Bitcoin?" And I said, "Porter, what's that?" And, as usual, my high school age son knew more than I did and started filling me in. And I started researching and getting down the rabbit hole, and it was really interesting. At the same time, unbeknownst to me, Overstock's founder and then CEO Patrick Byrne was monitoring Bitcoin and its use in Cyprus in the upheaval they had there. So in December, when in one of our executive meetings, someone brought up, "Hey, have we ever thought about accepting Bitcoin?" I didn't have to say, I don't know what that sentence means, as I knew what it meant. Both Patrick and I were enthusiastic about getting Overstock to a place where we could accept Bitcoin as payment. And I think maybe later that week, in mid-December, Patrick mentioned to some reporter that we would accept Bitcoin, but it would probably be in the second half of 2014. Well, no sooner did that news get out than developers here at Overstock said, "Why are we waiting so long?" And a group of them locked themselves in a war room in that week between Christmas and New Year's. And on January 9th, 2014, Overstock was the first major retailer to accept Bitcoin. Now, there were really two reasons that we were excited about doing it. First was we like to make it easy for people to purchase stuff on us. And if Bitcoin is a payment method like PayPal or a credit card, let's make it easy for people to buy product on Overstock. But the more important reason was we were excited about the underlying blockchain technology, and we wanted our developers to begin to get familiar with it. And so that was, another motive that was involved. And it was later in 2014 in the spring that we saw the first use case that we thought would be useful, and that was blockchain meeting capital markets and solving settlement problems. And we bought an alternative trading system and broker-dealer and rolled that up into what is now a company called T0, which has moved forward and has been trying to apply blockchain to the capital markets. So that was kind of our initial foray and how we started setting up in taking ownership interest in different companies that are advancing blockchain technology in different ways.
And so where were the areas that you were personally focused on initially? I know you're using the royal we quite a bit because you're CEO now, but you've had a couple of different roles that you filled. Where have you spent the most of your time? Because Medici Ventures started deploying capital in around 2015, right? T0, again, in that kind of early 2016, maybe 2015 category. Where was the lion's share of your energy for that duration?
That's a great question, and I'll give you a little of my history at Overstock. I'd been the president for quite some time, and then became the chairman of the board as I went through what my wife likes to describe as an odd midlife crisis, and I stepped aside and ran for governor in the state of Utah. And so I was less involved in the day-to-day at Overstock until I failed in that endeavor, and the Overstock board asked me to come back in a day-to-day role as the president of Medici Ventures. And at that point, Medici's main portfolio companies were T0 and BIT, that was doing blockchain meets central banking. And so as soon as I came back, I got very involved in both of those, was on the board of each, and then have been intimately involved in growing this keiretsu of related companies that's now about 20 companies that have interest in identity, land titling, capital markets, banking and currency, supply chain and voting. And so, other than BIT and T0, I've been intimately involved in bringing each of the companies into the Medici Ventures family.
And how has Medici Ventures focus changed, if at all, over time? Because in the early days, at least, it was, obviously Overstock is a large, e-commerce platform, but so much of what was being done on the T0 side was capital markets focused. Did you have a particular thesis that you were pursuing at Medici, and how has the portfolio evolved over the course of the last few years, particularly with the rise of other tokenized networks, but the relatively slow rollout of tokenized securities, which is really where T0 has focused its platform and its energy so far?
So the reason that Overstock and what ultimately became Medici, which is our blockchain arm, the reason we got initially focused on T0 was Overstock's history with battling stock market manipulation. And we really saw blockchain as a way to close that time between the trade and the settlement of security from 3 days to 0 days. What in the industry is called T+3 and is now T+2, we thought it should be T+0, thus the name T0. So that was the first use case that was kind of near and dear to our heart. And T0 continues to be the crown jewel of the companies in our family of blockchain companies. We own over 80% of it. We spend a lot of time working on it. Overstock itself has issued a preferred share that trades on the T0 platform. We're in the process of doing a dividend to Overstock shareholders so that every 10 shares of common or preferred shares that they own, they'll get a share of Overstock Series A, which again trades on the T0 platform. So that has always been the primary focus of what we thought was a killer use for blockchain technology. But when I came back in the summer of 2016 and the board and Patrick asked me to focus on building up Medici, my first discussion with Patrick was we need to think about what industries we want to be focused on, because blockchain is so revolutionary and so evolutionary that if we don't try and put together a thesis of where we want to focus, we're going to get spread too thin. And so our initial group of industries were really trying to figure out where blockchain kind of becomes a tech stack for civilization. And we first saw identity, being able to own your own identity and have that done in a way where you own it and it's not based on trivial arcana like your mother's maiden name or 9 random digits that some government has assigned to you. We saw identity as a key pillar in a tech stack for civilization. Then we saw figuring out how to digitize property rights, whether that's real property or intellectual property. We said if we can make it so that it's easier to prove ownership of property, that's a key part of what society needs to operate. Then it's currency and banking, and of course, Bitcoin was the first killer app that used blockchain technology. You know, we see the ability to bank the unbanked around the world as a real asset, a real selling point to civilization of blockchain. Then it was capital markets, where we were already doing stuff with T0. And then lastly, we were looking at voting, assuming that, you know, if we can help the governed be governed better and have more say in how they're governed, that was a key piece of civilization. Since then, we've added one other industry, and that's supply chain. You know, as we see goods move and flow and being able to prove their provenance, prove their authenticity, be able to track them back if there's been any problems with them, we saw that as another area. So those are the 6 industries that we focus on now and the 5 that we focused on initially.
What integration, if any, is there to the Overstock platform out of those different verticals and out of the portfolio companies that you have? Is it kind of run discreetly as almost like your moonshot bets and just dipping a toe in the water in some of these verticals, or are there more meaningful ties between the 2 different entities?
Well, Overstock has always viewed itself as a technology company first. You know, and in 1999, when we began, being an e-commerce company was still quite novel. And many of our customers back then, you know, it was such a novel thing that they were more comfortable calling one of our customer care reps, giving their credit card number over the phone because they didn't want to type it into the computer. So we have viewed ourselves as kind of technologists on the transaction frontier. The biggest relationship between Overstock and Medici and the blockchain companies is sharing of talent. One of the things that Medici has is 50 developers that are enterprise-grade blockchain developers. That group has grown to as many as 100, 120, and then some of them will peel off, become T0 employees or become Medici land governance employees. They work on projects for the blockchain companies that want them. Some of what we found is we had a unique group of blockchain specific developers who weren't used to building enterprise-grade software. Medici could draw from Overstock's pool of developers and then put together these enterprise-grade developers and blockchain developers. They would learn from one another and then really be able to create world-class blockchain-based enterprise-grade software. And so there's been a lot of sharing of talent, and some of that now is going back and forth. There is some relationship between some of the companies in the Medici Ventures family and Overstock, but it's more nascent as we've tried to help do, for example, know your customer and anti-money laundering work. When Overstock onboards a supplier, we've got a Medici Ventures company that is interested in beginning to get involved in that process. Most of the connection has been that we're just trying to be a technology company at our core and utilize our technologists to look at new areas where we can continue to be leading edge, cutting edge in our thinking.
You know, I guess the one thing that kind of stands out is the thematic investing that you're talking about, and you know, Overstock is a technology company. It sounds like there's a broad-based focus here. I'm wondering, you know, which areas in particular that you've deployed a lot of energy and capital into, maybe on the capital market side, which are the ones that are, you think going to be the first killer apps or the golden goose, or the things that you own versus invest in as a holding company, right? And so that's kind of number one. And then, I'd like to maybe drill down from there and understand how you view the different components fitting together as that core pillar, whichever it is, gets built out.
Well, the company that we have the largest ownership in and we've spent the most money on is T0. And we really do think it's the one that will change, it will be significant in how it changes things. And the goal there is to get it so that assets can be digitized easily and then put in a security token, and historically difficult to capitalize industries, or industries that have been difficult to pull money out of piecemeal will become easier to do that. So one of the companies that T0 is working with is a big real estate company that is tokenizing some of its property in Manchester, England. This is property that's got rents. The owner, either has to sell it all wholesale or can tokenize it and take a portion of its ownership off the table and allow others to have a piece of the ownership of that property, including the revenue stream from rents. And so there are a lot of assets like real estate, like intellectual property, think music or art, that have revenue streams that can be tokenized, and you can spread that ownership out in a way that capital markets can be so good at. And so we really think T0 is probably the first place to have success like that. If you were to ask where else have we spent a lot of time, effort, and treasure, another would be BIT, a company that's located down in Barbados, BITT, that's working with the central bank and the Eastern Caribbean Central Bank, so that union of countries can now issue a digitized fiat currency. Why would it want to do that? One, it's probably cheaper than printing paper bills and coins. Two, it's a way to help the unbanked among the population in the Eastern Caribbean have access to digital currency, which is really an important thing. Most of us in the United States and in the developed part of the world can't fathom what it would be like to not have a bank account, to not have a place to store our money, to not have a way to access digitized money through a credit card or a debit card. If you don't have access to digitized money, you're standing in line to pay your utility bills. You're carrying around a gangster wad of cash anytime you're going to the grocery store. It's just something we can't even fathom. But 40% of the Caribbean operates that way. 70% of Latin and Central and South America operate that way. And 90% of Africa operate that way. Creating a digital currency, whether it's a cryptocurrency or a fiat currency issued by a digital bank, really will create a way for people who have a smartphone, which is almost everybody on the globe, to be able to have a digital wallet and access digital currency. We think it'll be life-changing to them. So BIT is another of our portfolio companies that we've spent a lot of time, effort, and treasure, and we have developers here at Medici Ventures that are working on the BIT project and doing so for sweat equity. That again, it's a big bet for us, but it's a bet that we think is going to pay off.
So much. It sounds like there's a bunch of exciting initiatives going on the traditional crypto side. And to be honest, I want to spend a full hour just on that, but I feel like we'd be remiss to not talk about the e-commerce company that you're leading, given everything that's going on with the coronavirus. We're talking live here. This is going to go out in a couple of weeks, but right now it's Wednesday, March 11th, and Italy just shut down all stores outside of groceries and pharmacies. So, I think we agree that, in the future, like blockchain technology is a fascinating innovation for financial services, for identity, for all the things that we talked about. But on the Overstock e-commerce side, how do you even begin to think about potential surge in demand or supply chain disruptions, or just monitoring the overall health of your entire company? Maybe using blockchain, maybe just using traditional tools, in such a shock to the system, and really an unprecedented event like we're seeing today.
Well, that's a great question. And just yesterday, we had a work from home test where we had almost all of our employees work from home to see how that would, how we would be able to handle it. And we've done a lot of planning. We did it around SARS and other events in the past, but this one feels a little bigger. And part of the Overstock system, I think that's so great, is we actually warehouse very little of our inventory. Most of it's owned by third-party dropship suppliers. So it's a diverse network of about 4,000 suppliers. We think that distributed nature of our supply chain helps should supply chains become crimped during any kind of pandemic. We also think that online shopping has a real opportunity to surge while people are at home, while they're quarantined. If they're less interested in going to the mall and other public gathering places, it could be a chance for online commerce to surge. If there's ever a run on area rugs like there has been on toilet paper, Overstock is well positioned to supply them. I don't know if that run on the bank is going to happen, but we're ready.
And in terms of tracking those different suppliers, I mean, how are you using some of the different blockchain solutions that you've invested in? Do you see that accelerating, or is the timetable still more or less unchanged, and this is going to operate on the same schedule as integrations would have otherwise?
We're not using any of our supply chain solutions yet, in part because we've so focused. When we thought about supply chain, we thought about it horizontally and vertically. And the horizontal supply chain providers are likely to be the big behemoths in the world. And so when Walmart and IBM partner, they can get, beginning to end of any supply chain and try and get blockchain adoption. Or IBM and Maersk, big shipping company, they come together. Those are horizontal applications. We've focused as a smaller entity on more vertical applications, like with Grain Chain, which is a member of our Medici family, which is really working with farmers trying to get paid quickly as they drop grain off at the grain elevator. Excuse the pun, but it's a more siloed industry, and we think that's easier for quick adoption. Another one where we've looked at a thinner siloed industry is Vincent, which is working in the wine industry to try and make it so that the average consumer can buy wine futures directly from the vineyard or the vintner and know the provenance of the wine, so that when the bottle shows up, they know they're getting the wine they purchased. And ultimately, if that wine becomes valuable in trades, when people can be assured that they're buying the real McCoy, old wine in old bottles, not new wine in new bottles. But as far as it affects Overstock supply chain right now, we have not integrated tightly with blockchain technology. That may change and accelerate. That may change and accelerate with a coronavirus pandemic, but it hasn't yet.
That was a very serious answer, and I just finally had the moment that I was expecting when my little kid runs behind during this work from home. So it's a perfect bookend, a little bit of levity to everything that's going
Ryan, I
on.
think it's great. And as the father of 5 sons, when I see a little toddler waddle in the back, it makes me feel, makes me nostalgic for days gone by.
Of course, yeah, and we were joking before we started recording that my aspiration is to get to the point where I'm the man with the lion behind my left shoulder versus the bassinets and the running, screaming toddlers. So I think it's fascinating, so much of the work that you're doing, and I think everybody is more or less in uncharted territory in terms of how to respond to the coronavirus and what tectonic shifts that are going to create in technology. But Overstock certainly seems to be, from a legacy standpoint, and also just in terms of some of the bets that we've made, in a pretty good position to weather things.
If I could comment on one of the places I see in our portfolio of companies that I think government should be jumping on, it's mobile voting. When I think about the coronavirus and gatherings, whether they're at state caucuses and conventions, whether it's going to the old folks' home or the junior high school to get on a ballot machine that everyone in your neighborhood has touched, these just feel like, petri dishes to be avoided. And Votes, one of our portfolio companies, provides a mobile app on a smartphone that to date has been used by 2 groups of voters, overseas voters, particularly military personnel and their family, who have had a hard time voting absentee, but can do so quite easily on a blockchain-based remote mobile voting app. And then disabled voters who are protected by the American with Disabilities Act, who've been able to vote from home, again, using the same app. This is the kind of thing, this is the kind of blockchain use case that could be accelerated when people get worried about, gathering in large groups, being forced to touch, public voting machines and other, even doorknobs. You can avoid doorknobs if you're voting from home mobily on an app. So there could be a chance for acceleration here.
Yeah, and just a couple of weeks ago, we had this issue with the caucus voting application. That was not votes, though, was it?
No, the group in Iowa was a company called Shadow, and I think it's given a real black eye to the mobile voting industry. But Votes has been used in West Virginia and Colorado, Washington, Oregon, Utah. It was recently used in the presidential primary in one Utah county and worked flawlessly, again, for people that are voting remotely, either because they're overseas voters that are protected by federal statute or disabled voters that are protected by federal statute. That's kind of been the thin edge of the wedge that Votes is focused on, but that could expand much more. As you and I say, we'd rather not go to the old folks' home where the polling place is and just vote from home.
Well, and it's not just us, right? I mean, but you start to think about seniors that are voting, and their turnout is typically much higher than younger demographics as well. This is something that has to be solved potentially, right? If some of these elections are going to move on as scheduled. I'm trying to think of a scenario where. Like what happens if everybody is in lockdown or quarantine during some of the primaries, which looks increasingly likely now with these later states. What happens? I mean, they have to figure out some shotgun solution to mobile voting, or they have to figure out some delay mechanism. I don't know. I mean, it's completely uncharted territory. So maybe you're more privy to how some of these conversations are unfolding behind the scenes, but I'd have to imagine that platforms like Votes are just seeing a sudden, insane spike in interest and ultimate potential.
Well, government is always slow to react. I think this is a no-brainer solution. we cannot disenfranchise the population because of health concerns. You know, if I were a county clerk or a state secretary of state that was over voting, I would be looking at companies like Votes and Votum really hard right now to say, how can I implement this quickly? How can I get it to more people than less? And it doesn't have to be the only solution. You know, there are people that vote by mail. There are people that, you know, come to the polling place, but give people the option of downloading an app on their phone and doing it that way.
Jonathan, I appreciate you being generous with your time today. What are some of the things that we should be looking out for in terms of new developments, or kind of what's next on the crypto side, the portfolio side, or with some of your wholly owned properties in the course of the next 6 months?
Well, on the crypto side, and I'm, you know, Medici is not really investing in crypto, but Overstock still accepts Bitcoin, and we see somewhere between $20,000 and $30,000 a week of revenue come in from purchases with crypto. I do think that we're going to see digital currencies adopted more widely, and whether it's, you know, something like Facebook was talking about, where it's a company-backed or foundation-backed crypto that's based, it's more like a stable coin based on a basket of fiat currencies, or it's something like Bitcoin itself, which is, you know, separate and apart from any government. I do think there's a lot of pressure for digital currencies to be accepted, whether that's because of unbanked people, whether it's because of nation states that would like to see the US dollar not be the de facto global currency. There's a lot of pressures that are going to push us that way. So that's what I see on the crypto side. On the general blockchain side, I really think that the most killer app for blockchain technology can be self-sovereign identity, where you and I control our digital identity and can give out to people we're transacting with only what they need to transact with us, and do so without a bunch of trust intermediaries that are holding our private identity information. And, you know, just to explain that, if you come to Overstock and purchase something using a credit card, you have a bank, we have a bank, there's credit card processors in between there. Your bank is a honeypot of information about you that's protected in just the oddest ways. You know, if someone knows your mother's maiden name, your social security number, your bank account number, if they've hacked into that information, they can probably prove that they are you even when they're not you. With self-sovereign identity on the blockchain, you've got biometrics that can protect your information. When someone comes to Overstock and purchases something with Bitcoin, there's only two things we need to know: their shipping address and that they have Bitcoin that they can transfer to us. We don't need to know a credit card number. We don't need to know a billing address. We don't need to know a PIN on a credit card number. We don't even need to know an email. We just need to know where to ship the goods and that they can transfer us cryptocurrency in the way. So it's a much simpler transaction that takes out lots of trust intermediaries. So companies that are working in the identity space, like Evernym, like Finclusive, like Vital Chain, a company we've just announced today that we've taken an interest in. These are blockchain use cases that I think are really powerful.
I think we're looking forward to playing around with some of these applications at Messari, I hope, in the coming months. And we'll certainly be spending a lot of time inside and in front of our computers in the virtual realm. So will be an opportunity at the very least to get our hands dirty and test these and other applications out. Jonathan, where can people find you online? Are you on Twitter, or are you avoiding that like the plague?
No, I'm on Twitter, at jjohnsonnow. That's my Twitter handle. I'm not as active as some, but I do like to promote what we're working on. Medici Ventures is also on Twitter and is promoting blockchain within our family and beyond. We try and really be an information source. And then when I write an article or two, I usually post them on LinkedIn as well.
Excellent. Well, Jonathan Johnson, CEO at Overstock, thank you for being generous with your time. I'm sorry that we're not meeting physically in person at the DC Blockchain Summit with the Chamber, but hopefully we'll make up for that soon. And this was a great episode, so appreciate you coming in virtually.
Ryan, thank you. I look forward to meeting in person and talking more about supply chain and other blockchain things in face-to-face.
Amen. Well, thank you to our audience and everybody else tuning in for this most recent episode of Masari's Unqualified Opinions. I'm Ryan Selkis. Until next time, thanks again. Peace.